Joining me now, Richard Haass, Counsel on Foreign Relations, President Emeritus, and Centerview Partners Senior Counselor. Richard, I just threw out like 38 things that we're not going to solve all the problems of the world, but let's start with the ceasefire potential between Russia and Ukraine. What do you make of these latest developments in just the last 2 hours?
I hate to be Debbie Downer, but I don't make an awful lot out of them. Vladimir Putin is all in favor of peace or ceasefires in principle, just not in practice. He wants to continue prosecuting the war in eastern Ukraine, wants to continue to increase Russia's territorial hold, and he obviously has a set of demands for any peace that would be unacceptable, not just to this, but to any Ukrainian government. So whether or when direct talks start between Ukraine and Russia, I don't think it matters that much, Liz, unless Putin changes his positions. And I think that brings it back to us. Well, it doesn't matter who hosts the talks. What really matters in diplomacy is what's the context. And what's critical here is that the context be one in which Vladimir Putin realizes that continued war will not get him anything. Volodymyr Zelensky has to understand that continued war will not get him back to his 1991 borders. I think we have Zelensky there. We don't have Putin there. So this administration is going to have to decide whether they are going to keep the spigot open to Ukraine for military and intelligence support in order to persuade Putin that more war will not deliver for him.
It's very hard to believe that Putin is engaged in ceasefire potential because just last night, 273 Russian drones attacked Ukraine. So what are we talking about here? Did you find it interesting that the president had put out on Truth Social that there were some discussions with Putin during the 2.5-hour-long phone call about U.S.-Russia prisoner exchange, and then he threw in Russia's dying to do trade with us? Is this a smart way to maybe dangle this forcing of peace talks upon Putin?
I don't think we can force peace talks on Putin. He's made this his priority. His price now is pretty high. But I think the president is right. President Trump is right to want to broaden the conversation with Putin, whether it's trade as a potential incentive. We've got our nuclear agreements are going to expire early next year. So we've got this broad agenda that goes way beyond Ukraine. We've got to worry about Russian, say, support for North Korea. And I've never seen diplomacy talking as somehow a favor we bestow on Putin or anybody else. So I think it's great to have broader talks. I think the idea of having a bilateral meeting between the two presidents is fine. But again, I don't think Putin is going to be moved to compromise on Ukraine unless the United States makes a firmer commitment to Ukraine's defense.
Let us move to a different war zone, if we could, and that, of course, is Gaza, Israel. Israel is resuming the aid trucks coming through, but by the same token, they are launching the Gideon's Chariots ground operation. So this is a little bit confusing, I think. And for our business audience, it would be great to have peace on all fronts in the world, certainly. But by the same token, you wonder, listen, you can't really question, in a way, Israel's focus because there's still more than 24 rather, hostages that are still in Gaza. They want them out.
For good reason they want them out. It's totally understandable. Unfortunately, there's very little reason to believe that continued military operations will get them out. Most of the hostages, as you know, who have been released have not been rescued. They've been transferred as part of diplomatic agreements. And the question is whether this Israeli government will make diplomatic agreements with Hamas. There was an agreement. The first phase of it was implemented. The United States, both the Biden and Trump administrations helped to negotiate it, as you know. But the Israeli government didn't want to go ahead with the second phase, which would have gotten the remaining live hostages out. Why? Because they didn't want to stop military operations against Hamas. They didn't want to pull the Israeli Defense Forces completely out of Gaza. So I would say right now we're unlikely to see peace. We're unlikely to see progress. Indeed, at the risk again of being a negative person here, bad situations can get worse. And I think right now we're looking at open-ended fighting in Gaza. We're looking at a long-term Israeli occupation. And there's powerful voices in Israel that want Israel to settle some of Gaza, even annex parts of it. So again, I'm worried about the trajectory there, even though I think it's good news that at least a few aid trucks, not nearly enough, but a few trucks carrying humanitarian aid are getting in.
Richard, we got to wrap, but I want to ask you, which conflict ends more quickly, Israel, Gaza, or Ukraine, Russia, in your mind?
A critical factor in both lists will be us. If we put some pressure on the Israelis, I think we can move that towards a ceasefire. If we give support to Ukraine, I think we could actually, President Trump could get the ceasefire he wants between Ukraine and Russia rather quickly. I really think in both, we have a large degree of potential influence. The table is set for Donald Trump to have real progress in diplomacy. We didn't even mention Iran. That would be a third. I think there's three separate situations. He is poised to, he's been dealt some very interesting cards, and the question now is how he plays them.
Indeed. He's certainly had some positive moves when it comes to getting hostages out. I can say that. Richard, thank you. Good to see you.